I'm delighted to pass over to Simon Whitehouse, who's going to chair. I'm really interested in this. I think this is going to be, hopefully, open some ideas, give you some new connections and new thoughts about culture and the use of data in a new context. That stuff I was talking about, new contexts, this is very much it. Simon, who has also been very instrumental in setting up this whole day, thank you very much. Can we welcome Simon and the rest of his panel? Thank you.
Thank you very much. In this session, we'll be hearing what health professionals and people who commission social care and health in particular want from arts and cultural-based projects. We're also going to look at the way that some arts and cultural organisations are changing the way they deliver and are starting to deliver, in fact, some health-based projects. Commissioners of service are increasingly asking for evidence of the impact of the services that they provide. And this isn't something that smaller organisations, and this is regardless of whether they're an arts and cultural organisation or not, but smaller organisations who provide services into the health sector are used to being asked for or to providing. And it requires a change in attitude from them that isn't just around administrative procedures potentially. And I think one of the things that we'd probably argue from a Hello Culture point of view is that digital technologies are one of the things that help to provide that sort of learning about what works, as well as the evidence back to commissioners of services that the service that they're providing does work. At the same time, we're going through a period when both public sector funding is being cut back and our expectations of what a health service should provide for us is probably increasing in most of our minds. And those two things obviously don't sit aside each other very well. So each of our 5 panellists have been asked to speak very briefly, as you're all aware, and answer the question, can the arts demonstrate the measurable health benefits of their work? So I'm going to briefly introduce you to each of our panellists before asking Hugh, who I should introduce first, to step up and do his presentation. Hugh Evans has 23 years experience working in social care in the NHS, and in the last 5 years he's primarily focused upon transformational work and partnership building. He's described himself as a firm believer in the strength of healthy communities and also in the value that the creative industries can add to them. His aim is to make the awareness that inspired and imaginative commissioners can commission those services and make it part of the everyday. So I tried to reword what I was saying on the page in real time, and that doesn't really work. Yeah. My apologies.
Thank you for that.
Jessica, next to me, has commissioned and managed cultural programmes across arts, museums and libraries, and has also led on cultural policy during her career. She's got experience of working in the independent arts sector, in local government and for national bodies, including MLA and Arts Council England. And for the past year, she's project managed the Cultural Commissioning Programme, which is a 3-year Arts Council funded programme delivered by a partnership of the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, NCVO, New Philanthropy Capital and the New Economics Foundation. Marion Thompson, is Associate Dean at the Faculty of Health here at Birmingham City University. Here she oversees the management, assurance and enhancement of academic quality and standards within the faculty, which has programmes based in the health and social care sector, which are often run in collaboration with other institutions locally, nationally and internationally. Then Trevelyan at the end. Trevelyan Wright has been the Executive Director of BArts, an arts organisation based in Stoke-on-Trent since 2009. And while he's been there, he's initiated and managed the development of several digital projects in the arts. Currently he's working on something called Stoke Arts Bank, which is a digital network of community arts resources and producers in the area, and also the Heritage and Community of Industrial Baking in North Staffordshire, Bread in Common. And today he's going to be talking about some of the digital tools that are being developed to support individuals living with dementia as well as their families. And in the middle we have Claire Benjamin. Claire heads the Education and Communities team at the International Slavery Museum, Museum of Liverpool, Merseyside Maritime Museum and Seas Gallery. She was responsible for the strategic development of education initiatives and community engagement across the museums. She's currently working on the acclaimed House of Memories project, which we'll be talking about today, which has been devised to connect health and social care providers for dementia care with National Museum Liverpool's fantastic world-class collections. The project has recently won the Museum and Heritage National Award, the NIAS, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Adult Learners Award, and has been highly commended by the National Dementia Friendly Awards. So, with those introductions done, I shall ask Hugh to stand up, and if he can speak for very briefly.
Come off.
You're falling apart.
Yeah. Well, it's not me, it's the equipment. There we are. Good afternoon, everyone. So much for the creative industries. Good afternoon, everyone. I've got 3 minutes, and I've never done anything in 3 minutes except for things that need to take a lot longer. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is an almost impossible task, but I'll start anyway. The NHS is great. Because of it, I can see. Because of it, my son Harry is alive, and many other people I know as well. It does so much, and everybody loves it. We're all here because of it, but it's got a problem. Well, it's got a range of problems. It's got 2 key problems, I think. The main one is it's a victim of its own success. You can see there some statistics. I'm doing the background bit, by the way, so that we can see the context of the issue. There's a massive increase in life expectancy in the last 66 years. Many more people are living into their old or pensionable ages. There's been a 1/7 increase in population, mainly as a product of that. For lots of reasons, the NHS is struggling to meet the needs of this growing swathe of people, quite many of whom are living for a very long time with frailty, complex needs, long-term conditions, and as an accident and illness service, which is the same as it was in 1948, it's failing to really serve those people particularly well. It needs to be coupled with a long-term conditions kind of support service that will keep people occupied, happy and well, so they won't have their conditions exacerbated and dissolve into illness unnecessarily later in life. The way that we kind of view this in the commissioning piece in the NHS and social services is about a shift from it being purely about health to talking much more about well-being, and that's all about a kind of shift from specialisms, diagnosis, eligibility, things being geared around the clinical and social care specialisms, and being much more about whole person, whole life approaches, which is exactly where folks like you come in. That will mean a huge shift of emphasis from the massive institutions. Some hospitals turn over around 500 million a year. That's as big as some of the biggest companies in the country. We need to think about that they're necessary, of course, but we also need to think about community and a much more plural range of providers so that people can get much more individualised, self-orientated and tailored stuff. People need to move from, we need to move from the concept of people as passive welfare subjects, recipients of health, and we need to start thinking much more about how people should have, I know it's a bit consumerisation of it is sometimes a bit distasteful, but the idea of choice and the idea of people being able to configure their own support packages in the context of their understanding of their conditions and their circumstances is very important. The biggest question in the news on Tuesday, isolation, the penury of old age. How are we going to address the fact that in these extra 20 years that people are getting, how are we going to address the fact that quite often people end up in very isolated circumstances without necessarily enjoying any of the benefits of old age that they probably thought they were going to have when they were younger, paying national insurance, etc. The final bit, we need to move from the output-orientated view of it, as in bums on seats. How many people have we got here? 100, that's successful. Actually, the outcome-orientated bit is about, what kind of benefit did people get from being here? How good was it? Did they take ideas away? Are they going to do things in the future as a product of having been here? What are the outcomes in the NHS? What are the new ways that the NHS and local authorities that run social services are going to measure success and judge whether or not these services work? Do commissioners know? Not really. In a lot of ways, we don't know. We know it's all about people saying that their lives are better, people saying that they have got a much better kind of, a much better kind of experience of life. They feel better. That clinical intervention or that social care service has actually given them more independence and freedom, but we still haven't really got the mechanisms in place to be able to properly judge whether or not these services work. So I think arts organisations can provide significant health benefits, but commissioners will have to learn from you about how to measure the demonstrable outcomes, how we can make a judgment as to whether those health benefits are good, whether they've worked. It's a joint process. I think we charmingly call it co-production sometimes. I think commissioners need to actually understand and believe the concept of co-production and get off the high horse of superiority that many of them are on. And then the last bit is the second problem that I mentioned at the beginning, which is government policy and austerity. The NHS costs about £100 billion a year. Social services cost about £30 billion a year. At present, the thinking is that that should reduce by about 30 billion or 25% by about 2020. It's still a lot of money, but we're going to have to do a lot of work if we're going to spend it more effectively. So that probably was more than 3 minutes, wasn't it? I'm foaming at the sides of my mouth.
I think you've done admirably well here
thank
to
you.
cram all that in such a short space of time.
Yeah, so that's the basis of the discussion.
Jessica, would you like to go up next?
So let's get the presentation up. Jessica Harris, and I'm project managing the 3-year Arts Council funded programme, which is called the Cultural Commissioning Programme. And what I'm going to try to focus on is use of data within the context of commissioning. I'm going to use the shorthand cultural commissioning, by which I mean the opportunity that is open to commissioners of public services to commission arts organisations, museums and libraries to deliver public service outcomes. And some of the challenges that are there, both for commissioners, as we've just heard about, but also for the arts and cultural sector in relationship to that. So this programme is about trying to connect the arts and cultural sector with public service commissioners. And I think we've gone through some interesting discussions in the first year of the programme and the research phase that we've gone through around when does data become evidence and when does data need to become evidence. We've just, as I say, gone through a research phase and talked to the arts and cultural sector and also tried to talk to commissioners. Harder, in all honesty, to speak to commissioners, difficult to engage them with this agenda, but we have connected with some. And so the findings come from both sides of the equation, if you like. And the findings are both statistical and also qualitative. And I think the latter of those is really important because the quantitative data is varied, patchy, covers diverse topics. So the actual qualitative input that we've had has been really helpful. This is a framework that we've put to the findings that we've had from the research phase. It's relatively subjective, but it's useful in as much as we can use it as a way of testing ideas and developments as we go through. And so you might have a different view on the arts and cultural sector's contribution to public service outcomes, and this is one way of looking at it. But I think significantly what's come from this in terms of the strengths that commissioners and the cultural sector have identified that the sector contributes to public service outcomes are fourfold, and they're identified here on the left. Better opportunity to really engage people in activities than other traditional methods of delivering public service outcomes. We know the cultural sector is exciting, it's interesting, it's innovative, it's creative, it engages people. Contributes to the preventative agenda, and as has been mentioned a moment or so ago, we are moving towards a time of huge demographic change within this country. The NHS is facing major financial crises. Adult social care is also up against significant financial crises, and there is a policy thrust, which isn't necessarily carried out into practice as yet, but there is a policy thrust towards looking at preventative services, and the arts and cultural sector really contributes there. The arts and cultural sector contributes to the sense of bringing people together shifting away from stigmatisation of social problems and bringing people together through different productive means, and making use of a positive asset-based approach rather than focusing on people's problems. So where does evidence sit within all of this? We've looked at this in a number of ways. We've particularly looked at what the barriers to collection of evidence against those outcomes is, and found that there are both enablers and barriers here. In terms of showing how the arts sector contributes to social outcomes, it's difficult. It's very difficult to show at 100% attribution that there was a cause-effect relationship going on there, that an intervention led to an effect and end of story. It's very, very difficult to show that. However, what there is a better evidence base for is showing that there's a contribution from the arts and cultural sector to long-term social outcomes. In the health field, health commissioners tend to expect statistically evidenced impacts based on large-scale clinical trials, and that's enormously difficult for the arts sector to demonstrate. Lots of the evidence collection exercises that have gone on are small-scale. The kind of routes and the kind of methodologies that the arts sector uses is incredibly diverse, and it's difficult to scale up in the way that health commissioners at the acute end tend to be looking for. But on the other hand, on the enabling side, nationally, arguably, we're shifting towards a greater recognition of the social determinants of good health, and we are opening up our recognition that people living in isolation, people living in poor housing, people living without skills, without employment opportunities, do not have good physical or mental health. And that's where the arts sector comes in very strongly. And we're also shifting towards recognising that users need to be engaged in identifying what the outcomes are from the activities they engage in, and therefore how to measure those more appropriately. And a shift away from top-down delivered services that don't really produce the kind of outcomes that people want. So, what's the importance of evidence and how robust is it? And from our research findings, we've identified that there's a relatively strong evidence base for the contribution that the arts sector makes in terms of the well-being agenda. But tackling the clinical agenda in terms of health and physical and mental health is challenging. There is a lack of economic analysis on the return on investment of the arts interventions. It's really, really quite difficult for the sector to show that it compares in terms of costs with other sorts of interventions. Just step back. The need for evidence varies. Some budget holders are convinced by creative approaches but make limited demands for evidence, and others will make much more stringent demands for evidence. And we've also found that many arts evaluations do not particularly reach the robust research standards that they may be required to produce, and there's a need to link up with the academic sector and some of the work that they've done on this. So I've really given you a very mixed picture there of what commissioners are looking for and the history, if you like, in terms of where the sector has got to in showing that evidence. And the last slide here is just a little bit of work that we're doing on the Cultural Commissioning Programme to try to bring some of those evidence sources together. There's a range of sites that collate evidence, Culture Case, Cultural Value Project, Third Sector Knowledge Portal, the National Alliance for Arts, Health and Wellbeing. And through the Cultural Commissioning Programme site, we will be publishing those links and pointing to people to where they can pick up on some of that evidence. Some of it is peer-reviewed and is robust in academic terms. Some of it is project evaluations and is less robust. But all of it is worth looking at and searching on in relationship to your own work and seeing where you can draw on stuff so that you're not constantly having to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. Just also to mention that the Arts Council will be rolling out a research grant programme to fill some of those gaps next year in the research base, so that's worth looking out for. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Marion, would you like to go next?
Okay. Good morning, or afternoon now, isn't it? I'm Marion Thompson, an Associate Dean Academic from the university. My responsibility is for controlling the quality of what students get in terms of their health and social care courses. So my interest is really from a commissioning point of view in terms of new exposure to new interventions, whether those be on the clinical side or whether they be an Arts Council type activity, and where do we go from there. So if we are exposing students to these new interventions, then we need to do several things. We need to measure the interest in students. We need to measure the response that students get from patients, and we need to move forward in terms of creating those new interventions as a part and parcel of everyday health giving processes to members of the public, essentially. So although we might look for a clinical focus, that doesn't have to be the end of the story. Any sort of data can indicate an impact and indicate that we are moving on in terms of this particular intervention, and it's becoming a much more useful, much more recognised intervention that we might use in the future. So impact is all really, and demonstrating impact is quite challenging, as Jessica was just saying. That it's not always easy to do, but I think we have to move forward and to recognise different ways of illustrating impact to move forward into this area. Whoops, went the wrong way. Lots been said about commissioners today. Commissioners don't always know, but they do need to know about the future of the workforce. And we need to think about how they are going to link together and recognise the impact, recognise the need for new practitioners in particular areas. That's me done.
Thank you very much. Claire, would you like to go next?
Hi everyone. He said put this in my pocket. I've got 5 and none of them are real apparently. So thank you everyone for welcoming me here from Liverpool. I travelled down this morning. I just wanted to very quickly show you a successful model of how health commissioners can work with the cultural sector successfully and reach a workforce at scale, and that was through the House of Memories programme. Now these are our fantastic venues in Liverpool. If you travelled up today to visit them, you'll be sorely disappointed because we're closed because of the strikes. But hopefully people will come back. We're a public sector service, and there's some people in the country who don't think we should be there, but we will stay. The House of Memories programme, it very much began, we've been on a whirlwind with it over the past 3 years. The Department of Health approached us in 2011. The Prime Minister's Challenge on Dementia had just been announced, and they were looking for some real ways on how to tackle the action plan. And the cultural sector, commissioning the cultural sector was something very new to them. They often operated on a national picture as opposed to regional, but I think they understood the message that we were trying to put across. We had access to hundreds and thousands of memories through our social history collections, and if you link dementia with memories, it's very much around the long-term memories stay more intact as the dementia journey progresses, and we have invaluable access to all of those people's memories through the objects that we hold in trust in the collections. What we've done with it, we've actually gone from a very small programme in Liverpool and we've gone national. So again, Department of Health, they want to see how a model would work in Liverpool and how you can scale that up They were very much interested in the workforce development. How do we ensure that the health and social care workforce was skilled and trained and understood how to care compassionately for people living with dementia, whether it was through professional paid care or whether it was through family care? Because as we've gone on this journey, what we've found massively is that many paid carers who are coming on the training programme, it's happening within their personal lives. They've lost their fathers, they've lost mothers, relatives to dementia, and they want to understand how they can improve what they do. We came to Birmingham. We were here in March. For those who were aware of it, we came to the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery because the collections you have here are amazing. And the diversity of the communities here in Birmingham as well, some fantastic stories and memories. And they've just recently released an amazing memory suitcase loan service for health and social care workers in and around Birmingham area. So do try and find out about that. Very much the training focuses around how you engage the person living with dementia with objects. And that has actually took on a whole new level, and we've done that digitally. In the past year, we launched at the House of Commons at the start of June, where we had high-level ministerial support, which we absolutely needed, because sometimes you need to go out of the city to get recognition, to go back and say, yeah, this is a good idea, to our own local commissioners. And we had the Health Minister there, we had the Culture Minister there, we had different people who were in that decision-making capacity and were able to look past that silo-based mentality of Department of Health, how do we resolve our issues? Department of Culture, how do we do this? We're looking at a step change to work together to meet the same agenda. Now, the House of Memories, My House of Memories, is a digital app that we've just launched. It's a free app. It's on the leaflets that you have on your chairs. What we did with this, we worked with an organisation called Innovate Dementia in Liverpool. It's a European project, a research programme, working with Liverpool John Moores University and European partners to look at how you use technology and a living lab methodology. So we work directly with those people living with dementia through memory clinics, through the health partners and academic partners to really co-create a product that was designed for people living with dementia, for people to use who have dementia. In essence, it's digitised 100 of other collections that we have in the Museum of Liverpool, and there's activities you can personalise. If you are using this within a care setting, you can use it with a group of individuals, you can use it one-on-one, and it helps the carer start a conversation where it's potentially very difficult. We've had people talk to us who go and visit their own parents within care settings, and an hour talking to someone or trying to communicate to someone who is living with advanced stages of dementia is massively challenging, it's difficult. And we're hoping that through this product, through using conversation, try and connect and find out who that person was before dementia got hold of them. And in a way, we're just running with that. It was launched in May. Hopefully at some point today, you'll be able to have a little look at it. It's free to download on iTunes UK. Again, Department of Health are interested very much, and so are the clinical commissioning groups nationally, in terms of how we can use the model of this app. So wherever you are, if you're in Birmingham, if you're in Brixton, if you're in Sunderland, you can go into that app and access the cultural collections within the region, the geographical region where you are supporting. And I think that's my 3 minutes, if not more.
Thank you very much. Brilliant.
I'm kind of wishing I'd gone before Claire now, because I thought that was fantastic. I think it's no surprise that actually the two projects that I'm actually talking to you about work have focused on dementia, because that's an area where, from our limited knowledge, we understand that direct medical interventions are still quite provisional and quite partial in the ability to actually cure dementia. So there's a space there. You know, in 2025 we may all be taking a pill, but until now, when we live with it and it's a condition and it's a social phenomenon, that those are kind of things that artists are interested in exploring. To go back to what Blastery said earlier, my company, which is a small company of artists based in Stoke-on-Trent, we asked ourselves a question about 2 or 3 years ago, which was, did we think that recent advances in digital tools and creative tools, from iPads to Chaos pads could make a difference in the abilities of older people to create work. So we talked to our foundation, and they funded a very small pilot project which took us into residential homes, geriatric wards, carers networks, and we tried a whole load of digital tools and digital ideas out. That project was called Soundworks, ran for a couple of years, and what we found was something much bigger, which was, again, to go back to Claire's talk, that there was a huge need for an expansion in the resources that families and carers and individuals with dementia could draw on, that we felt digital tools could meet. So we went back to the funder and said, we think there's something much bigger, not even something particularly artistic here, about memory boxes and individuals and their families, and we think the digital tools could make a difference. So we got a tiny bit of funding and built a pilot site called Digital Memory Box, and again, it's almost like, I think, the other half of the coin. We were focusing on people uploading and digitizing their own photos, their own small sentimental objects, their own letters, and creating an online memory box. I don't know, again, if you've been into a care home, you'll often see sometimes it's a shoebox, sometimes it's a folder, sometimes it's a very weird slot in a door where people can keep the objects that come to stand for them when they can't talk about themselves. And these are interpreted by care staff, by families, and we felt that the social aspects of the web would enable us to greatly enhance that ability to understand the objects and the photos that people were putting into their box. So we ran this in carers networks, Alzheimer's cafes, and other places for about a year. We learnt a huge amount. These are some screenshots of how you would upload a photo, how you could tag it, how you could put it to a map, how you could make a timeline. And then we went, well, maybe we should build something bigger, something that people could use that was offline and online, that was easy for families to use at home, because what we'd identified was that the key people were not the individuals with dementia themselves who we could intervene with. It was the adult children, the people who are my age, who are Simon's age, who have got relatives who are 70 and 80 and undergoing this stage of their life. But they were very confident with digital tools. They often lived apart from their parents, and they wanted to something that could help them to contribute, again a great word, to contribute to improving the quality of care for their relatives. And we thought that the route might be for us to become software developers and work with software developers and build something. And this is an incomprehensible graph. I could have picked anything that describes the 6 months I spent talking to venture capitalists, early stage investors, bits of the government like the Technology Strategy Board. And we came out of that and went, and I think this is something kind of I'd urge everybody to reflect on. If you're an arts organisation, are you a software developer? Is that really what you want to do? What we did was take a step back and go, maybe we shouldn't be building this thing. So we started to build a partnership that might actually create something. So we're looking at, again, exactly like Claire's project, we're looking at a combination of personal content that people have uploaded themselves and social content. One of the early things we found was that we might place a hierarchy on photographs and think that a picture of somebody's wedding was more meaningful than a picture of a bus station. but actually to an individual, to a particular individual that we've worked with. They spent 10 minutes of their life every day waiting at that bus station as part of their journey to work. They remembered nothing about the 8 hours in their life that was their wedding. But when you show them a photo of the bus station, wow, there was lots of stuff to talk about. So lots of stuff that is in the social domain, in the public domain, and actually quite, quite dull, is actually photos of cars with men we found incredibly stimulating. So we want to work with Staffordshire Archives, with Age UK, ourselves, and actually we found somebody who's already building this thing up in Scotland, a company called the Memory Box Network. When we found them, we went, brilliant, now we don't have to build it, we can do what we're best at as artists, which is to create opportunities in the real world for people to engage with stuff. I think that's me done.
Thank you very much, Trevelyan. So thanks very much to all 5 of our speakers today. I'll start off by asking a few questions and then throw questions out to the audience, so getting those prepared. Hugh, you spoke about the demographic changes and the changes that the health service are going to have to, or are going through, and some of that seemed to centre around us taking more personal responsibility for our own conditions. Do you think that there's an opportunity for arts and cultural organisations to help to inculcate that?
Certainly, yes. I think there's a chance for everybody to enable people to support people to do that. I think it's essential in many ways. I always think back to the kind of personal experiences of these kinds of things in order to illustrate, really. I come from a family of musicians, and my family identify through their music playing. My mother she's still alive, but she's retired, a professional orchestral oboe player. My father was a clarinetist. There's all sorts of music going on in my family, and I can't imagine any life for those people that didn't include those things. And if somebody hasn't got the benefit of their children or their friends or a network to help them, to support them, to keep up with those things when they start losing the ability to attend concerts or, even find music for themselves, then how do we support them to do that? And I suppose it's about knowing individuals, knowing what interests them, and helping them. One funny story, bloke in Stoke, do you know Will Boyce? He tells this one about jazz, and his dad likes jazz, but his dad likes traditional jazz. And so if he went into a home and someone said, oh, he likes jazz, and then brought him along some kind of Ornette Coleman or something really avant-garde like that, that would do his head in. So you have to know people and you have to support them through knowing them. And I think that some of the digital capabilities, the technology, can help people to develop much more personalised memory boxes or music collections or things they can access really easily. That's one side of it, but the other side of it is community activity, work going on in communities, and arts organisations are brilliant at that. So, yes, is the answer to that question.
Thank you, Hugh. Jessica, you spoke about preventative services and about the social determinants of health, and that being an area where arts and cultural organisations can definitely bring value, but it's difficult to get the evidence of it. Do you know of any evidence of people who have been, or organisations that have been able to put cash values against preventative services, for instance?
Well, I think part of the picture that I was trying to convey was that there isn't a single commissioner type. It varies according to locality, it varies according to the area that they work in. And so that makes it a very complex picture for the cultural sector to engage with. But having said that, yes, where those commissioners are convinced and very often where they've seen the evidence with their own eyes, if you like. It was interesting, the mention about, for every care worker, they have a relative. So people have that personal experience as well as their work and their strategic sphere of influence. And where we're finding as a programme we're making inroads with commissioners, it's very often because people like you have managed to engage with them, got them involved in your work, and they've seen some of the impact. And so commissioners at that level may be very happy to look at evidence around softer outcomes that are part of getting towards a much larger holistic outcome. And nobody delivers that holistic outcome on their own, after all. So I guess it's about relationships, it is about evidence, it's about working with commissioners on different types of evidence that might be acceptable. It's a bit of a cliche, but it is about working with others and working in partnership to do more than you can do on your own.
Yes. Thank you very much. Marion, I was interested in what you were saying about the needs of new practitioners, especially. I know it's difficult to say what's the attitude of a whole cohort of individuals, but what's the attitude of your students to working, because they are in the Faculty of Health, aren't they?
Yeah.
Working with arts and cultural organisations.
It's probably something that's never entered their psyche, but it's something that I'm sure you can find students who had an interest in music or an interest in the visual arts or whatever to say, okay, should we try this? Yeah. So I think through various social activities that could potentially be harnessed, and students aren't against anything that's different, or they're much more dynamic in terms of practitioners who've been out there doing it for X number of years. So I think if given the input, I think there's potential there.
Excellent, thank you very much. Claire, I know the digital project's fairly new for House of Memories, but what sort of opportunities do you see for that collecting more evidence of its value?
Yes, it is new. We've only launched last month. However, I think what we've seen already is we've evaluated the training for the past 3 years, and we know directly from commissioners, from the health workforce, social care workforce and housing workforce that it does improve how carers deliver their service. Now, the app, that's very much more personalised in the sense of it can be used in a person's home. It doesn't have to be in a recognised setting. It's much more of value to family carers as well as paid carers. And I think what we're going to be starting to look at through the Innovate Dementia programme is how that makes a difference to individuals' lives, not just the workforce. What we have anecdotally, on an increasing number of occasions, people are saying to us, we know that this is working. We have got care homes coming to us saying that, and first of all, we didn't think someone with later stages of dementia certainly would use a tablet. They would look past it. Actually, what we're finding is completely the opposite. We've had carers saying to us, so-and-so has been using this tablet for over 40 minutes and they're using it. They're functioning with it, and that's massive. 40 minutes doesn't sound a lot of time for us, but someone who is caring for someone with later stages of dementia, it's massive. I think we just need to be able to collect that information and then see on a longer period of time how that improves the person's well-being. How does that improve them in terms of feeling confident to go out the house? How does it improve the confidence of the person caring for them and their skills? So it's multi-layered, and I think the journey's just beginning, but we have absolute confidence that because it's been developed by the people who are using it, it serves that purpose well, and hopefully it will improve a person's well-being on many different scales.
Yes, thank you. And I think that talks about the outcomes rather than the outputs that Hugh was talking about, wasn't it? Trevelyan, the one thing that struck me with the way that you were talking about the development of the application of the work that you do, rather in more general, is about the learning that you've undergone as you've gone along. Do you think of that as translating from learning into evidence of effectiveness, or is not the primary focus?
No, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is that the funding system for the arts is very different than the funding system for health. And I think that is a massive challenge, because we've been working on that model of work for over 2 years, probably over three now, and we've had 4 different funders, none of whom are conventional arts funders, and none of whom are health funders either. I think the real challenge is to get to the point where we can demonstrate the clinical evidence. How do we scale up? So one of the things I think we've learned is, what is your point of intervention? I think sometimes arts in health can overclaim massively, and we're encouraged to perhaps overclaim by some of the contexts that we work in. So we've very clearly focused on the adult children of individuals with dementia, and how we might be able to support them to better support their primary carers. That sounds quite an indirect intervention. We're not saying that we'll directly improve the life of the individual with dementia, though we think that could be an outcome. But choosing the intervention that you can actually create evidence around, as opposed to the intervention that you think somebody wants to hear, or that you might be driven to, I think is absolutely critical.
Thank you. That's a really interesting and valid point. I'm going to throw questions out to the audience now. Julia has got a... So if people want to put their hands up. Dave.
Thanks very much, Dave Hart from Birmingham City University. First was a point. I thought your presentation, Trevelyan, was really interesting, because it was a reminder actually that of the value of visual data. Okay, and actually it's a really interesting emerging research area around the big visual data, not big visuals, but the volume of data that comes out of social media networks that is purely visual. And there's been an overemphasis on text, actually. And secondly, that the stuff that has meaning to people is the banal, and it's the everyday, and it's the, and that's kind of unexpected, actually, because we think of it, we want to point to other things, more arty things, as opposed to the bus stop or the bus ticket or the stuff. So that's quite interesting, really, the banality of data and how that has value in people's lives. The second question, actually, is about evidence, and I thought there was a really interesting point about evidence being kind of contested, actually, and not fixed. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on whether you were kind of suggesting that the way in which arts and culture organisations go about health-orientated projects rarely produces evidence robust enough for you. And I didn't know whether your kind of let's work together thing was kind of skating over that, actually, that it never quite is presentable in terms that can have genuine impact for you, and that then has a consequence in getting that stuff commissioned further down the line. And then what do we do about that? Is it that these organisations need to pair up with academics more, or what's the answer to that?
When you say for me, do you mean for commissioners?
Commissioners, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very difficult to make a generalised response to that, because we the areas where we have been focusing as a programme are on health and wellbeing, older people, and place-based commissioning. And for all of those areas, many of the priorities, the approaches, the ways of doing things are localised. In terms of adult social care, children's services, place, building stronger communities, we look to local authorities primarily as commissioners, not exclusively, but that forms a large body. The health sector has been disaggregated to clinical commissioning groups as the commissioning bodies, notwithstanding that there is still some central commissioning that goes on. So you're looking at a very fragmented system. And so it's impossible to give a single answer to that. Notwithstanding that, I'm certainly aware of some examples of arts organisations that have gone through fairly robust processes with random control trials, that sort of thing, and produced evidence of impact. but there's still a tension there around the scalability of that. But then I'm also aware of having sat in a very interesting conference run by the King's Fund, which is a policy think tank in terms of the health sector, where my take on what was going on in the room was a very acute tension between the audience, who were primarily clinical commissioning groups, and the speakers, with those people from clinical commissioning groups saying, we have got a major demographic time bomb coming on here. We need to do things differently. So I think we're very much in dialogue nationally on this at the moment. And it'll probably take an awful lot of collective effort to make some of the shifts we'd like to see. Where there is greater opportunity, and as cultural organisations you need to be mission-led as much as anything, but where there is some opportunity at the moment is in the preventative field. Look at your local public health authority, look at what that's trying to do, look at your strategic health and wellbeing boards in your localities, look at where their priorities are, and see what their conversations and their strategies are about.
Thank you, Jessica. Hugh, did you
Can I, yeah, I mean, I'll try and... these are my opinions, not the opinions of anybody who might employ me, I hasten to add. If you look to NHS England, if you look to CLG for the means of measuring success or otherwise, you will not be satisfied. The means of measuring success in the context of urgent care, non-elective emergency medicine, is the 4-hour wait. The 4-hour wait target gave us mid-staffs. At the end of it, when people scurry around and organise their 130 billion budget around meeting these spurious targets, we do not succeed. It's the target-driven and requirement for evidence-driven mechanisms that have put us in the position that we're in. That's why we need to have some much more radical qualitative thinking around how we measure whether these things are successful or not. And we're at the beginning of some of those kinds of discussions because, you know, as soon as you go with a pitch to a group of clinical commissioners or a group of commissioners in the local authority context, or even better, a partnership of those, they'll say, yes, but what are your outcomes? What are your measurables? What are your this, that? How much are you going to save? How many non-elective admissions are you going to prevent? How are you going to decrease length of stay? How are you going to hasten discharge, etc.? And actually, it's about this fella having a nice time, isn't it? And that's much more what it's all about. And that's probably less easy to measure. It's about actually in giving people the ability to actually have a much more to enjoy their lives, and for their lives not to be a penury of waiting for the carer or waiting for someone to call them. And that is immeasurable, I think. So the challenge isn't so much about how the arts organisations can demonstrate they meet measurable targets. For me, the challenge is we've got to rip apart this spurious monolith of target-driven NHS. Otherwise, we'll never get the best out of our £130 billion. Don't tell me, boss. I mean, we're sorry.
I was just going to add, in particularly the social care field, the voluntary sector is, if you like, you can edge towards commissioners via the voluntary sector if you're going to be instrumental about it, in terms of being mission driven, that there are people working in charities and small organisations who, for example, in the field of dementia or social care, would be someone like your local Age UK, and you can have a conversation with them and develop a project, and then together you can create something that commissioners can understand. And again, I sit on the board of a children's charity. Credibility. You know, if you're an arts organisation and you suddenly come up with an arts and health project targeted at older people, why would we fund just you when we've got a bid from Age UK who've been in that field for 30 or 40 years? But if Age UK, I can tell you, will be looking for new models, new partnerships, new ways that they can achieve their mission within the social care sector. And artists can be and arts organisations could play a huge part in that. So again, I would urge, we see it like a ladder or a staircase that you climb, and the commissioners are right at the top. But there are loads of people along the way who can scale up, who can develop that evidence base with you, develop your model of intervention and enable you to work to understand it and refine it. It doesn't have to be, here's me, here's the commissioners.
Thank you. Lara. Is the tech failing?
Should I hold it then? It's following on from Hugh's point. I'll say something Mar Dixon's just said on Twitter, because I was thinking the same thing. Where's Mar? I'll say yeah. Obviously, Simon and I programmed this, so we kind of know what we were hoping to get out of the day in terms of debate. And Mar's just pointed out the same thing I was thinking of, was everyone is kind of talking about the same things and there are parallel conversations going on. And I think what I was just thinking about was there's a lot of talk obviously from arts organisations moving into the health sector, whereas what's really clear from when Claire and Trevelyan talk is you talked about the need of the communities that you're working in first. And I think in a way we need to start looking at arts organisations generating income through health, and there was a very kind of combative commissioners don't listen, arts organisations don't know what we're talking about and the outcomes. Surely what everyone's trying to do is actually deliver public service benefit to communities, and if we start from that as a premise, and it comes back I think to the point you made about data earlier, Matt, is the audiences and the communities that you're working with don't really care about the frameworks and the outcomes, and that's the stuff we can do behind the scenes. And surely what we should be looking at is really qualitative impact benefit, because then both the commissioners and the cultural organisations are really coming from the same place.
I think certainly we found in Liverpool, sorry, I think I've knocked that before. I think we've certainly found in Liverpool that the sum of the parts are being more powerful than if it was just a museum partner or just Age UK and Age Concern in Liverpool or the Austerity. We've set up a network, Happy Older People in Liverpool, because it simply is, we know that there's a lot of people and organisations out there who are simply wanting something to do to help improve their well-being. And there's an awful lot of organisations, arts, heritage, theatre, community, voluntary, who can provide that activity. And a lot of the pressures that are facing, you know, GP practices, the health sector, in terms of the amount of people who are going there for not necessarily medical reasons, it's for social issues they're going for. They might feel depressed because they've been lonely, they're at home, they see, you know, the only conversation they have is within the taxi to go and get their weekly shop. We're able to try and, what we're doing is try and bring all of those different organisations from across all of the different sectors together to try and tackle the issue, particularly around social isolation. It's a big problem nationally, it's a big problem in Liverpool. We're on the top of pretty much every index of multiple deprivation. There's real issues in, we're a national museum, the only national outside of London, and we're operating in a completely different climate than the nationals in London. And we feel a duty of care to the communities that we serve. And I think we have that awareness that we're not going to do it on our own. And some people don't want to engage with culture, but some of those people don't know the benefits of it yet. So if you can work with those agencies to help broker it, all the better.
I'm just going to add, it works both ways. If you, again, you know, arts organisations in particular, we can be guilty, and sometimes we do it ourselves, sometimes we're led by the funding system, to pick up this year's big thing and go, now we need an arts and health programme, now we need a programme for early years, now we need this. And then in 3 or 4 years' time we get excited and bored by something else. But these healthcare challenges aren't going to go away, they're only going to get bigger, certainly in the field of older people and dementia. So the challenge for us is, are we in it for the long term? Are we prepared to run a programme and iterate it and scale it and analyse its impact over 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years? Because that's ultimately what's going to create those partnerships with the NHS. I mean, how long does it take to get a new drug to market now? So if we're thinking of ourselves in that context, it takes, what, 10, 12, 15 years, Hugh?
Yeah, I'd like to see NICE evaluate an arts programme.
Absolutely.
That'd be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Well, it is actually quite interesting, just in terms of NICE. And I mean, I do like to see doors slightly open, because there's the possibility of pushing them a little bit further. NICE has recently taken on the remit for producing guidance and frameworks for the field of social care. And certainly I've heard NICE say recognise that the demands for evidence that are appropriate in the clinical environment will need to be stretched and broadened and shifted a little bit in the field of social care. So I think it is worth keeping an eye on some of those movements. And I think the other point is that for the cultural sector, it's important to realise that while the commissioning sector looks incredibly complicated and diverse and fragmented, to recognise that commissioners might think the same of the cultural sector, and the more you can collaborate and share a common mouthpiece, a common portal, the easier you are to find.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you for your patience, because I'm aware that we've kept you from your lunch for an extra 15 minutes. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our panellists for the health panel. I've really enjoyed the debate. I hope you have too.